Thanks for joining us today in the latest installment of the Senturus Education Series. Today we're going to dive into installing Cognos Analytics V11, specifically the most recent release, which is V11.6. And this will be covering updating the tips and tricks that we've done for C11 in the past, and it is specifically related to installing and therefore upgrading. If you're here for information about the functionality in Cognos Analytics 11, we have recorded sessions for that, and just let us know if that's what you were here for. We'll send you the link. All right, got quite a few items on the agenda today, all related to installing Cognos 11. We're going to cover multi-server environments, the specifics about database drivers, how do you preserve your settings while you're updating, upgrading to your new releases, and then we'll do a Q&A after a little Senturus overview. I'm Greg Herrera. I'm the president and co-founder of Senturus, and I'm really happy to introduce to you Todd Schumann. He's kind of a regular in our webinar series, so audiences typically give great ratings for Todd, so you should be in good hands today. Todd has over 15 years of experience with Cognos and heads up the Senturus. He's the practice lead for our installations, upgrades, and performance optimization practice. And he most recently presented alongside IBM product managers at the 2016 World of Watson Conference on considerations when upgrading to Cognos Analytics. Welcome, Todd. And with that, I will give you the floor.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
You bet.
We've got a bunch to cover today, and as Greg mentioned, this is going to focus primarily on the 11 Release 6 version that is the most recent version today. So if you haven't worked with IBM Analytics yet, this might be new to you. If you attended some of the earlier webinars, you may notice some of the slides are the same, but there's also been some changes from release to release. So we'll kind of touch on how things look today and maybe where they're going in the future. If you've never been in Cognos 11, you'll notice the installation process is pretty different from the way it was in Cognos 8 and Cognos 10. There's lots of different installation paths that can be led down by the installation wizard. So the first one you'll see, when this is, I think, introduced in Release 4, was when you first fire up the installer, and again, in the past you kind of had one of those zip files that you had to extract before you could do anything. Now it's just a single executable, although it takes a while for that installation to finally unload and expand. You don't have to worry about installing any 7-zip software or WinZip and extracting those files. It's all right there for you. But once you get up and running, it'll prompt you right away, and it's going to ask you, do you want to install the IBM Cognos Analytics, or do you want IBM Cognos Analytics tools? Most of the time, you're going to want to go with the first option, Analytics, which is going to be the BI software. You'll be prompted to select what components do you want, what type of installation do you want, several different choices around that. Tools, and the S is a bit deceptive there. As of today, there's only one tool, and that is Lifecycle Manager, which does get updated from release to release. It has gotten a lot better than it was in older days, in version 10 specifically. It's just a tool that you can use to basically automate some testing. You'll point it to your old version of Cognos, you point it to your new version of Cognos, give it a list of reports you want it to run, and it can do some basic comparisons for you, show you execution times, PDF overlays to show you any variances between how a report used to look versus how it looks now. So it is a useful tool for testing, but for the sake of today, we're going to kind of focus more on the BI server and those components. So picking that choice leads you to a second choice, and it's going to ask you, do you want an easy install or a custom install? And the big difference here is that the easy install was something that they added in 10.2.2. They've kind of changed the wording around. I think it was called quick install back then. But essentially it stands up like a really low-end content store. It'll stand up like a basic web server. It'll stand up a basic authentication server. So you can kind of have like a sandbox Cognos 11 environment without really having to know anything about how to configure this in a production environment, how to actually connect to a production enterprise grade database like an Oracle or SQL Server for your content store, or to use LDAP or Active Directory. You don't have to really know any of that stuff. You can just bring up a quick version of Cognos and be up and running pretty fast. However, it is not enterprise production level software that you're going to be working with, so you definitely don't want to use this in a production environment, strictly sandbox. So most of the time, I never use the easy install. It's always going to be custom, and that's probably what you're used to in the past. You didn't really have an option. It was always custom. You pick the components you want, and that's what we're going to do today. Another step that it prompts you once you kind of work your way through these different screens here, is this the first install or is this a connect and install? And essentially, they changed the way that you have to do your installation in the Cognos 11 world. In the past, you could just distribute the different Cognos components in any order you wanted and bring things online whenever you want. In Cognos 11, you have to kind of first set up at least one content manager. You can combine that with all the other components, but you have to have a content manager available and running before you can use this connect and install. So we'll look at the screenshots and explain why that is in a second. But that first install, you'll notice that this is the screen where you select your components. Content repository is the new name for what was called content manager. Application services is what they used to call application tier. Gateway is now called optional gateway. Not really optional, but you can actually run a version of Cognos now without a gateway. You can completely interact with the dispatchers, but we'll talk about that as well. And some of the samples are now included as well in the actual server installation software, so that's a nice thing as well. But you notice with the first install, I only really have 3 options available out of the 4. That content repository is in bold. There's no option there for me to uncheck that or remove that. So you kind of have to, like I said, have that content manager at least that running and installed before you can do anything else. That said, once you do have that and you want to use the ability to expand and connect, you'll be working with a multi-server environment. The screenshots now look a little bit different. Since we've already kind of defined that we're going to connect, we now have the ability to enable or disable the installation of a content repository. So this would be your failover. If you wanted to add failover, you can now do that. You can not add a content manager. So you can kind of toggle all the different components like you did in the past. There's no restrictions here once you're connecting. However, after you do make that selection, you're going to be prompted to fill out some information called connect and install. It's going to ask you the URL of that active content manager that's running. So it's going to be the fully qualified domain name with the port and then /bi. And then depending on what you use to set up your user authentication, is it Active Directory, LDAP, something else, it's going to ask you for a namespace. It's going to ask you for a user ID that is in the system administrator role and a password. So you need to make sure you kind of have all that information available, and once you plug that in, you'll hit next. It'll actually go out and try to talk to that server and collect some information about your environment. If everything checks out, it will actually bring over some of the configuration settings for you when you fire up Cognos Configuration. So additional steps and changes to the way you install Cognos 11 that are somewhat different than what you have seen in the past. I've also heard some rumors that this may be changing for the new version, release 7. As soon as we have that information, we'll be sure to update the slides and maybe do a new presentation on those changes. But this is the way it currently stands today. So once you get all that up and running, you get all your components installed and configured, you get to the gateway, which we talked about. Is this optional? Do you have to install the gateway? So no, you don't have to. It is technically an optional thing. However, single sign-on, if you want to use single sign-on, which I don't know really anybody who doesn't want single sign-on. Obviously, there's some security cases where people don't want this, but no one wants to remember another password or have to be signing into another application. You probably have enough of those that you deal with every day. Other things like image browsing or integration with some other third-party apps. There are a lot of specific reasons to install the gateway and to set up your IIS or your Apache. So typically that's something that you're going to want to include, especially in a production environment. So I don't technically consider it an optional thing, but you definitely want to, make sure you do your due diligence and decide if that's something that you're going to need or not. However, once you do make that choice, setting up, IIS in the past in Cognos 8 and Cognos 10, granted there were some changes as IIS itself involved, but for the most part it was pretty straightforward and basic. You would create an app pool, some virtual directory, some applications, and just kind of pointed it to your Cognos installation folders, your CGI bin, your web content. You had to set up some handler mappings occasionally, but the whole thing could be done in a matter of minutes if you were good and you were familiar with the process and how to navigate through IIS. It has changed significantly in Cognos Analytics. If you haven't been exposed to this yet, I suggest you to take a look at the link I have posted in the deck here with the steps. It's several pages long. There are many things you need to do, including adding more features to the existing IIS installation that comes with Windows Server. You have to go to Microsoft's website and download the AAR 3.0 software that contains two specific pieces that you're going to need for Cognos Analytics, mainly the application request routing, the ARR, and the ability to add URL rewrites, which are a big part of the web content as well. App pools are also needed. Again, we're going to be working with lots of applications. You're going to have to edit the MIME types to handle different formats, JSON, wildcards, things like that. You're going to set up at least 5 different rewrite rules that handle the way Cognos is going to interact with both the legacy and the new content, single sign-on. If you're working with multiple dispatchers, you're going to set up server farms in here to help with load balancing. So a lot of work. This something that I could do in IIS in the past in several minutes now takes me several hours. The rewrite rules specifically have pattern matching that are very cryptic, sometimes runs of 20, 30 characters that it's easy to have a typo and it can make your installation and configuration here a nightmare. So it's definitely challenging. However, there is a good news. There's a cheat code. So there is, as of I think 2 months ago it came out, someone had the brilliant idea to build a batch file that you can run at the command line that just automates all the different steps in IIS. I don't know why someone never thought of this in the past. Even for the more simplistic Cognos 10 IIS configuration, it would have been nice to have this for years. However, this will do all those things for you. You just need to go and edit the file before you run it. It asks you for about 6 or 7 different parameters, and most of them you don't even need to change. I mean, if you're using the default website, you don't need to change that. If you're using a standard app pool, they just define one called ICA pool. If you have any problem with that, you can change it, but you can leave that alone. Are you going to change the alias? Typically do the IBM Cognos as the standard alias, but maybe you need something specific. So many of these things you don't need to change. The installation path will default to the C program files, IBM Cognos Analytics. You just may need to change it to like the D drive or the E drive or whatever you're installing it. Very, very easy to interpret it. It's not very cryptic at all. There's good comments and notes in there. You just plug in your values, you save it, you run it at the command line, and within about 5 seconds it creates every single rule, creates the website, the applications, app pools, everything for you, and you're up and running. This has been the best thing to happen to me in Cognos in a long time. It makes my job much easier, and I'm very thankful that someone thought to actually do this. So make sure you grab that file. The link there is available to download it if you're not using it. They do update this file. They put a date into the file name. There was one back in March, like end of March, 3/31, something like that, dated. Now there's a new one that's dated sometime in May. There may even be a newer one out there today. So do keep an eye on that, and also keep an eye on that other link on the first page with the installation steps. If you run into trouble, they update that from time to time as well. Depending on different installations and configurations people have, sometimes they find things that may cause an issue in your environment, and they'll add additional steps or things that can deal with that. So I definitely encourage you to check the links frequently and make sure you're getting the latest version, the latest documentation. And for bonus, if anybody knows what that code is for, bonus points, you're as old as me. Database drivers, another area in the installation that people get hung up on. Cognos 11, one of the best things, again, that I was happy to see was they finally decided to make the location for the drivers something that just made sense. In old versions, you had to go into, various directories, subdirectories, some of which are very cryptic, P2PD, web apps, library, B5 data servers, all these random places that someone hacked together, let's just drop it here. They got it right finally. It said installation path, drivers. It's just a folder there. You drop your drivers in there and you're done. Much better. We do see a lot of clients still not using JDBC. Cognos 11 specifically to use dashboards, the dashboarding tool, and a lot of the new features like data modules, you need to have a JDBC connection. They released, the DQM engine, I don't know, 5+7 years ago, which kind of, really made an effort to move to, JDBC. So you really need to make sure you're using those drivers, make sure you have them in there and they're up to date, so you can take advantage of all the new nice features in Cognos 11. Also, you need to make sure that you have the software, the clients and the drivers on every single server that's going to need to talk to the database. See this a lot as well. People are having issues. The database is, reports are occasionally running a report, then the next time it runs, it doesn't run, and it's because it's actually doing the load balancing. The first server it hits has database drivers. It balances the next request to a server that doesn't, and that one fails. So it's confusing to kind of troubleshoot and see why that's happening. You need to just make sure you have all those drivers and everything set up correctly on all the servers. So anything including, your app server, your app tier, your content repository, those things are always going to be talking to databases. So make sure you have the drivers on each one of those installed. And also, there's other clients. There's SQL native client, the Oracle client, installing that software. People are using older drivers. There's still, OLEDB, ODBC connections. Unless you have a specific need or reason to kind of keep those around, try to get to the newer ones. You'll get better performance. You'll be able to take advantage of all the new features. So lots of things to keep an eye on as far as your database drivers.
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
There was a question that about the JDBC drivers. Are they only for the data source, or can they use SQL Server native client driver for the content store still, or? That was a question that came in.
Yeah, so there's, I don't know if I have the link in the deck anymore, but if you just search for IBM Cognos supported software, it kind of shows you all the support they have for different databases. So there's a small list of what you can connect to for Content Manager. That's, specifically Oracle, SQL Server, and DB2. And then it shows you the version that supports. I believe SQL Server 2012 is the oldest version of SQL Server that you can use. So there's specific native client for 2012, and then 2014 and 16 share the same native client. So if you're looking for 2016 native client, it doesn't exist. It's just the same version as 14. For Oracle, 11GR2 you need to have as a minimum. That's the oldest version. 12C is the most current version to date that you can use. So you have to make sure you have one of those versions for your content store, and you'll need to have the drivers in place so you can actually make that initial connection to start up Cognos. Once you have that, then you're up and running. However, you're going to add data sources to have the reports run. So those will also need to have drivers. So if you're running an Oracle content store and you're up and running and it's able to connect to that, you're also going to need SQL connection, SQL drivers and JDBC drivers if you're going to be going after that in your reports. So everything kind of has to exist on those servers, and you need to have the right drivers in your drivers installation folder.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So as far as the JDBC drivers, another very confusing area is which JDBC file, .jar file do I need? You'll see, depending on the client you have installed, all these different numbers, 5, 6, 7, then it goes to 14, which 14 somehow is older than 5, 6, and 7. Not sure where these numbering conventions came from, but essentially, all you really need to know is that, if you're on 11GR2, you should use 5 or 6. If you're on 12C, use 6 or 7. You can go with just the specific one. If you need support for both, you can use 6. And to make it even more confusing, depending on the client you have installed, you may have 2 versions of 6. So you need to look at, you look at the file size, that's the easiest way to tell. If it's over 3 gigs, then it's the 11G version. If it's around 2 gigs, it's the 12C version. So just an absolute mess if you're not familiar with it and you're trying to figure it out. Even this information on the screenshot's not easy to find. So hopefully this is helpful for everyone to kind of have a slide like this handy just for future reference. That's the Oracle side of things, to which SQL Server says, Microsoft says, hold my beer. We're going to make this even more confusing for you. They have their own cryptic set of numbers here, specifically, versions 2, 3, 4, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 6, 6.2, that all kind of correspond to different levels of support. So I think when Cognos Analytics first debuted about 18 months ago maybe, it came with version 4.0, and it was already in the drivers folder when you installed it. Now I believe it's 4.1 or 4.2. Either way, you want to be using 4.2 as of today. As of 4.0 is no longer in mainstream support. I mean, it'll still work, but why use something that's already been cut off for support? So 4.1 or 4.2, what you want to use. Again, just crazy numbering and just the way that they make this so cryptic. So hopefully that helps as well. Another big topic, with these rapid releases from IBM, they want you to be updating more often. In the past, you kind of would maybe jump every version every year, so you go, 10.2.1, 10.2.2. Maybe you didn't have an upgrade budget, or you just didn't want to have, invest the time it took to do an upgrade, so you would just do, major builds 10.1, 10.2, and skip the minor releases, things like that. The reason that they're doing this is because supporting those huge chunks of people on all different versions, they're supporting bugs that have been fixed in newer releases that they have to go back and retrofit for older versions. So by keeping everyone on the same version, they can hopefully deliver a better product and keep up to date with the bug fixes while also offering new features. The new features is specifically one of the best reasons to keep up to date. With the different fix packs, or even going from 10.2.1 to 10.2.2 in the past, you didn't get many new features. Maybe you got a new database driver support, or something minor, but now they're actually adding a bunch of new features. The dashboards originally had no ability to interact with framework manager packages or cubes. That's all been added. The new mapping capabilities, data modules, stories, infographics, all kinds of nice new features that are being added several times a year. Makes it definitely worth your time to want to stay on top of these and get up to date. The issue with that is, you don't want to mess up what you have. You don't want to break everything and spend a ton of time trying to fix things. It should be hopefully as painless as possible. And I do believe at today with R6 going from R5 to R6, that has been the case. We've done several upgrades. Just right over the top. You just download the software, put it on top, and you can basically be up and running with a new version with very little effort on your end. A couple of things to note about that. You always want to back up your content store, specifically at the database level if you can, because once you apply that software and stop and start services, it is going to update your schemas and basically render anything older, irrelevant. So if you, were on 5, you upgraded to 6, you started services and you didn't have a backup, there's no way to get back to 5. That content store has been upgraded, so you'd want to keep a copy of that 5, archive it somewhere. If you do decide that something important broke or you're having issues with the new release, you could just reinstall the old version and bring back that content store, and you could be back to where you were, exactly. Another nice feature is that, when you do these releases, it does overwrite a lot of any kind of customizations you may have made. So specifically image files, if you have some company logos or things that you use in your reports, and they're inside the installation directory of Cognos, they'll get overwritten, deleted, etc., which again is very annoying. You may not even notice it. You start running reports and you see those broken links everywhere. There is the ability to set up a preservation text file. If you go to your installation directory, there's a configuration/preserve folder, and in that folder you'll see a file that's called preserve.txt. Again, they actually did a pretty good job with this. There's plenty of documentation and comments in that file. You just edit it with a notepad and go down there. You can call out specific folders or specific files in a folder, and it basically tells Cognos, don't touch these files when you're doing the release upgrade. So you'll make sure that any logos, if you have any jar files or integration with third-party apps that need to be in the installation folder, specifically call out anything you have here, and they will not get touched, which is a smart thing on their end. So JavaScript files, WAR files, certifications that you need for SSL, anything like that you have around, make sure you put them into your preserve file, and that way you don't have to even think about it when you decide to upgrade to the new release.
Hey, Todd, I'm going to ask, there are a couple of questions that came in, clarifications asking related to this, so if you don't mind, I'll ask them now.
Sure.
One is, does this preserve function save custom security configs, such as non-default roles and groups?
That would be stored in your content store. That's not a physical file, I believe. Okay. So that shouldn't be touched. That should come over, with the content store upgrade when you bring services online.
Okay. And then this other one, I think it is what you were saying, but it says, so the person, it's Trevor, he's saying he upgraded R5 to R6 and analytics failed. IBM is recommending upgrading over the top. Would you recommend this? Then he, as a side, says, I don't think he'll do it again, that he would do a complete install again. But what's been your experience there?
Yeah, over the top is the only way to do it now. In the past, it was called an upgrade, but it really wasn't an upgrade. You were basically installing a clean version somewhere else, another directory, another server, and then taking your content store, moving it, and then repointing it to that and bringing that online. So the term upgrade was not really an upgrade. It was more of just the installation and migration. These are actually upgrades now. It goes right over the top. So I don't know what the specific issue that that specific person had. But it should just go over the top. Like I said, just make sure you back up your content store, because again, once you start services and point to that content store, it's no longer, it's not backwards compatible. So have that content store back up, and you can always roll back. Just put it right over the top, let it do its thing, make sure you have your preservations set up correctly, and you should be in good shape. And if there's additional questions, you can reach out offline, and I can kind of talk to you about that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll get you offline there, Trevor, because it sounds like you're clarifying that you couldn't roll back. So that sounded like a big problem.
Probably you missed that second bullet point.
Yeah,
they should have that in the notes. Like a warning that pops up. Make sure that you're sure about upgrading, because you can't roll back. That's the big one right there.
Right. Okay. Is preserve.txt used for fixed packs as well, or just for an upgrade?
So there are no fixed packs in Cognos Analytics, technically. I mean, I think they have released like a hot fix or like an interim fix very sporadically. Just if there was something that someone came and uncovered, like a major bug that was causing issues that didn't get caught in the QA process. But the way it worked in Cognos 10 was you had to download the general release version, which was a 2 to 3 gigabyte installation file, and then you would go to IBM Fix Central, and you look through the whole list of there's 10 fix packs for this version I'm on. I'm going to grab the most recent one, which is cumulative, and it contains all the prior fix packs as well, and I'm going to apply that on top. Now there's no more general release in fix pack. It's the entire release now is the whole version. So it doesn't matter if you started on version release 1 or release 6, you have to download the whole thing, you put it right over the top, and you're good to go. There's no more concept of fix packs.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So again, just kind of talking with, again, it's an on-top installation. You need to back up and archive that content store before, because like I said, there's no going back if you don't have a copy of the content store. Here's that link I was referring to earlier, the check supported software and prerequisites. It's pretty thorough, it's pretty easy to navigate. Make sure that you're not going to lose any type of database connectivity. They don't change it too much once they kind of establish the baselines for Cognos Analytics. They haven't really moved it too much. I think they are going to be adding Windows Server 2016 in the next release, I've heard. So that has been out now for several months. So if you're on the fence with 2016, I believe it does work today, but it just wasn't in the supported list, so it should be fully supported by IBM going forward. But always check that list, make sure that your database, your OS, your hardware, etc. is all going to be compatible with the new version, and then grab the new samples as well. I didn't talk about this, but there was that samples checkbox that when you do the install, you'll get those automatically. Those are typically data modules, dashboards, some things that you don't need data sources for. You want to grab all those and make sure you can kind of, at least in your dev environment, install them so you can see some of the new capabilities and features. Reverse engineer them if you want, but there's some pretty slick things that you can do in the newer version that you may not be aware of, and it's helpful to kind of have real working versions of those that you can open up in the dashboard tool, the reporting tool, and kind of see how they work, and maybe use some of those design principles in your own reports. And that's it. I'm going to turn it back to Greg. Hopefully that was informative, and I'll stick around for a little bit to answer some questions at the end.
All right. Well, thank you. So what Todd's showing on the screen here is that we have a service to a couple of offers to help. We have a quick start where we get a survey. Have you fill out a questionnaire, and then from that we can give you some assistance, some guidance, and then of course we can do these full upgrades for you, where we're handling the migration of reports and other content as well. So you can contact us for that at info@senturus.com, or the phone number, or through that link on our website. So just in a little bit of advance, we're going to do just a real quick overview. Hopefully I can finish this in less than a minute, about who Senturus is for the folks in the audience that may have this be their first experience with us. We're a consulting company, and we specialize in business analytics. And one of the things that on the next slide that our customers tell us is that we're really good at bridging the gap between the data and the decisions. So we incorporate the business needs, we organize the data so that it's real easy for analysis. And this applies not just in the Cognos world, but in, regardless of the front-end tool that you're using, all the front-end tools benefit from well-organized data. For instance, they love having the data, both Cognos, Tableau, Microsoft, Oracle, or business objects. They all love the data being organized in facts and dimensions. So we do a lot of the work to get the data organized that way, enhance it with behavioral attributes and things like that, so that you can take your high-impact actions with maximum information to support the decisions. Our team is very experienced across the entire spectrum of business analytics. From most of the work goes into organizing the data, so we've got a lot of folks that are fantastic at architecture, and then once that data is available, we can help with any layer in the stack. And finally, our credentials are that we've been at this for actually over 17 years now. We've worked on over 2,000 projects over that time, and with a variety of clients across a wide variety of industries. So give us a shout if your organization is endeavoring on something in business analytics and might need some help. All right, then additionally we have some events coming up. There's a big, since the Gartner quadrant came out, and it takes a distinction between the self-service analytics tools like Cognos, like Tableau and Power BI. it's kind of shifted a lot of in there, the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So we had been asked by several customers to help sort through that and say, are we, can we switch to these newer tools, and how do they handle things like, distributing reports? And anyway, we've sorted all that out, and we're going to be presenting it in a webinar in early August, the 3rd. And then we mentioned that the resource library is the place for you to go to get this slide deck. There's all our recordings of our webinars and write-ups and white papers. A lot of knowledge is preserved there in the resource library. So we really encourage you to check this out. Check us out there. There's quite a few questions still coming in, by the way, and we're going to get to those here shortly. I did not yet mention, except in passing, that we also do training. All of our classes for our Cognos training have been updated to version 11, specifically 11.5, and so you can check that out on the course schedule, including there's some courses in there for the transition itself, that summary that assumes that folks have a lot of experience with Cognos up through version 10, and it's just, okay, now here's what's different in 11 for report authors and the like. All right. We also have, for the folks on the webinar today, a coupon for you for a free hour of one-on-one mentoring with a Senturus instructor. And you can get this when you register for any of our regularly scheduled Cognos or Tableau classes. All right, here we are, Q&A. It looks like everybody has figured out how to send in questions, because we have a number of them, and I appreciate that. So I guess, Todd, if you go back off of mute, and we'll start sending these over to you. Okay, there was a patient question early on from Ben. Can 10.2.1 and 11.0.6 run in the same IIS 8.0?
Yeah, so you can have multiple Cognos instances running on the same server. You just need to give them a different, alias. So, if your old one's called Cognos 10, you create a new application virtual directory called Cognos 11 and point it to the new installation directory. So you need to have different ports, different installation paths, and obviously, there'll be more steps, and you'll have to add that, ARR 3.0 package and go through the new configuration steps. But it's definitely possible. We do it, pretty often in development environments where they're already running a version we want to kind of compare before we move to production, and you can easily, stand up and run two versions at the same time.
Yeah, and he clarified that he if you can run them in the same IIS, I think you mentioned that the app name. So his situation is his C10 app name was IBM Cognos already, and if he uses that script in the cheat code, that C11 will get IBM Cognos by default. So does it just overwrite?
There's just a page that it kind of shows you the values you have to supply. So if you already are using IBM Cognos, then just make it IBM Cognos 11 or Cognos 11. It can be anything you want, and right. It'll use that as like a variable as it applies it across all the different IIS settings that it sets up for you.
Yep. Okay. Super. All right. And then when you showed that shell script, several people asked if that's available in Linux-based environments or a similar script for a quick setup of Apache.
Yes, there isn't one for Apache, but Apache doesn't have the same issue that IIS has. So, Apache is just text configuration files. You install Apache, but then once it's there, you just need to include, a Cognos, configuration file for Apache, and then you can just copy and paste, the text editor directly from the installation guide. That's, if you just search for Cognos Analytics, like Apache config. It's pretty easy to find if you just Google it. It has the entire configuration file. You can just do a copy paste, and again, you just need to kind of change a couple parameters. You know, where is it installed? What do you want to call the aliases? It's pretty straightforward. It's actually up until the IIS batch file came out, Apache was much easier to deal with because it was just a cut and paste. You didn't have to worry about missing a character when you're typing in URL rewrite rules or having to type in all the MIME types, things like that. Apache was much easier originally. It's still easy today. You just need to copy and paste. So if you just go and grab, they do kind of put like a little icon for the version that you're on. So there's different Apache config files for like version 6 and 4, 5, and 6 I think are all the same, but just make sure that you're using the right version. And there are different versions for like 2.2 versus 2.4 and things like that. So you shouldn't really need a batch essentially for that. So just do a copy paste and make a couple edits where you need to.
Okay, great. You had a bullet that talked about the new configuration group settings, and he's asking for a little more color on that. Like, should the ports be different for each distributed component? Can this be answered for a distributed system on a single server and multiple servers? I don't know, does that make sense, or may we need to?
So I guess it's about installing additional components on the same server. I'm not sure exactly what the question is about, but so I mean, when you stand up a brand new instance of Cognos on a new server, it's going to default, all your dispatchers to port 9300, and all your web traffic is going to go through port 80. Those are like the standard Cognos ports. If you're already running a version of Cognos 10 on there and you want to keep that running while you install Cognos 11, it is smart enough now that it's going to do like just a basic port scan to see what ports are available. So if 9300 is already being used by Cognos 10 and you install Cognos 11, it's going to default it to 9305, and it's going to do like 8080 for your web port. It'll pick the first available port that it finds or has a preference. And then also if you want to install multiple dispatchers on the same server, which is something that was popular before everything was 64-bit, to take advantage of a really beefy box. You could do that with different ports as well. So that's, it is going to kind of be smart enough to pick out the ports for you. You can change them if you want, but it should hopefully give you the right values and eliminate any, overwriting or fighting over the existing port that you may have run into in the past if you didn't know something was in use. Hopefully that's what you were asking about.
Okay. Yeah. If not, Trevor, let us know, and we'll just schedule a session with you. Oh, yeah, if there's any new info on the estimate for when release 7, 11.0.7 will be released.
Yeah, we're hoping early August as of now. Again, there's no guarantee, any of those dates are going to stick, but that's the current goal at IBM, I think, is to have it early August right now. They are, trying to make this supposedly the best and most stable release ever, and also adding a bunch of new features and functionality. So I know everyone's anxious to get that. I think it was originally slated for like mid-June, and then it was July, and now it's August. So it's taking a while, and I think there's been a couple significant bugs that large clients have run into that they're addressing. They want to get it right. So if you are one of those people who's having an issue with R6, there may be a workaround. So maybe reach out offline and let us know. But R7, again, we're anxious and hopefully get our hands on it sometime next month.
Okay. Several questions here related to the content store in the upgrade. So what's the preferred method for upgrading a content store from 10.2 to 11? Do backup restore the database or export import of a full content store?
Yeah, it's sort of switched. Several years ago, I used to always be a fan of doing it through the administration console and doing the full content store export and taking that file and then moving it to the new server and doing an import. However, As these content stores have gotten bigger and bigger, that process can take hours. I've seen it go into days, and it just puts a lot of stress on the Cognos servers. It requires babysitting. It'll fail sometimes. So it's just gotten really convoluted and messy using that tool. So now I recommend it. I think IBM has switched to that. The best way and the most efficient way to do it is the database. Just do it, at the SQL or Oracle level, backup restore, and just point it to the new version and bring it online. It'll be so much faster. It's an exact clone of your existing environment. If you do the content store export and import through the tool, you have to install into a blank content store when you first bring it online to do that, and that's also going to inherit a bunch of things you may not want, like the default Cognos security settings, like the everyone's in the administrator role, and that everyone groups in a couple places. It can be kind of a pain to track it down and figure out where those groups are. So if you have already had that stuff figured out and your security all locked down, do the database, and that will come back exactly the way you had in the past. So definitely prefer and recommend doing it all at the database level today.
Great. Yep. And there was another person that asked that he's planning on doing it that way that you described, the database backup. And then how about any concerns also for going to SQL 12, from SQL 12 to SQL 16 in that one? I don't know if you've experienced one of those, but
I don't know specifically challenges involved in going from 12 to 16. I mean, the one reason that you would always want to use that export import to the tool would be if you are switching databases. You can go from SQL Server to Oracle, or Oracle to SQL Server. That way, it'll basically take the actual vendor, the database vendor, out of the equation and just make it purely about the Cognos data, which is a nice thing. I would probably push that to a DBA and see what the level of effort would be to upgrade something from 2012 to 2016 in SQL Server, and if it's minimal, have it done at the database side. If not, you could stand up a brand schema or database in SQL Server and do that export import. But again, if possible, definitely try to push it off to the database side just for performance and a cleaner, more exact copy of what you went from to what you want your target to be.
Yep. Okay. All right. Are you aware of any issues of how upgraded reports versus new reports behave in Cognos Analytics?
Yes. Didn't talk about that today. That was in a webinar maybe I did like a year ago, like the considerations of going to Cognos Analytics. But the new version of Cognos 11 features one of the big features of it was called this interactive viewer mode. In Cognos 8 and Cognos 10, if you were just a consumer and you ran a report, you couldn't really do anything with the output. You just got a list report or a chart or a crosstab, and that was it. You could dump it to Excel or CSV, PDF, and that was pretty much all you could do with it. In Cognos 11, this interactive viewer, you can now right-click on the rows or the columns and say sort, calculate. You can swap rows and columns. You can turn on charts. There's a ton of functionality built right into the viewer now, and that's called interactive viewer. It's an actual property that exists in each report. And the mentality was that they wanted people to come from 10 to 11 and have everything running exactly the way it did in the past. In order to best do that, they set that property to false. So any content that you migrate into your new Cognos 11 environment is going to have the interactive viewer set to false. Any content that you create, so once you have Cognos 11 running, if you click that new button and pick a report, it's going to be set to true. You'll see that content is going to be, interactive. You'll have that special menu screen where you can do all those features. So you can change those on a report-by-report basis. You have to open the report, select the report at the top level, go to the properties, and you'll see that feature there that'll be set to false that you imported from a previous version. You just switch it, save it, and then you can run it with those new features. There are a couple gotchas with that. If you have JavaScript that you use using HTML items in the past, it's a trade-off. You either have to say, I'm going to give up my old JavaScript and take the new interactive mode features, or you leave the interactive mode set to false, and it'll continue to run your JavaScript as it did in the past. That's the big trade-off, and they've changed, again, I kind of go into more detail about this earlier, I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but they have a new way they're handling JavaScript in Cognos 11 as well. It's something they should have done a long time ago, but it's, putting .js files on the server, a centralized location, and referring to them with a new object in the reporting toolbar. It's almost like an include file. You just say, here's the JavaScript function. I want to put this in my report. That way you don't have to, cut and paste the same JavaScript snippet, 50 times across, 50 different reports, and if something changes, you have to edit it 50 times. It's all centralized, it's cleaner, and it also allows you to use interactive mode with JavaScript. So definitely, if you're using a lot of JavaScript in your reports today, you may want to, evaluate the level of effort and doing something like that.
All right, super, great answer. Next question. We currently have Cognos 10 in its distributed environment with each server having content manager, dispatcher, and gateway on each. Can this be done in Cognos 11 also?
Yeah, there's no reason you couldn't do that. The only point I was making earlier was that, that first install has to have a content manager. So in your case, all of them are going to have content managers, so it doesn't really make a difference. So yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, he was clarifying that one server has an active content manager and the others have passive content managers. Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, typically we don't see more than one active, one passive. There's no harm in having more, but it's a bit overkill typically, unless your environment is very unstable and you're having lots of outages. But yeah, 2 is usually the norm. But yeah, there's no issue installing additional failover content managers and arranging the components any way you want. It's just that first install when you're setting up a multi-server environment has to have the content manager.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's another client that has some SDK modifications. Can those be migrated? I'm sure that's kind of a specific case, but a case by case. But can you speak generally about the SDK?
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of hands-on experience with troubleshooting SDK issues, but I believe that the official word from IBM is that any SDK functions you were using in Cognos 10 will come over and will be supported in the new version. So I don't know if you ran into issues or you're just curious, but it should, at least according to the blanket general statement, it should be supported and it should run just fine in Cognos 11.
Okay. Great. Here's actually a really good question, especially for the audience and why we're doing this. Cognos 10 is being commissioned in 2018, specifically April 2018. Would you recommend migrating now with R6 or later, considering analytics is great, but it doesn't quite have all the features and capabilities of 10 in this client's experience? And the example they gave was my schedules. So that's actually that's a good one because I know a lot of clients were holding off. They wanted to move, and then release 2, release 3, weren't quite there, and then it started getting better. What's your take now?
Yeah, so we've been recommending Cognos since release 4. Obviously, each organization has different needs. So if there's a specific need that you have that isn't available in Cognos Analytics, then that's a good reason not to upgrade. I think I'd have to kind of, depending on what that need is, there may be a workaround. I mean, I did a webinar a few months ago about portal tabs, which is one of the biggest gaps that people are running into with upgrading to 11. Portal tabs were a key component of Cognos 10, and they're no longer supported. So you can essentially rebuild, a same look and feel and user experience of portal tabs in Cognos 11. It's just done differently, and it's complete rework. So the issue you had that may be holding you up, may be able to be done. I'd probably just maybe reach out offline and we can discuss, what those needs are. But yeah, I mean, you have about 9 months, 10 months before they kind of end support for Cognos 10.2.2 and all the different 10.2x versions. So at that point, if you run into any issues, there's no more bug fixes, no more real support from Cognos. So you want to make sure you're not caught off guard and don't, get stuck with a 6-month upgrade or however long it's going to take you after you run into a production support issue. So just, plan ahead and make sure you have time to be ready to upgrade, and then keep an eye on, the different releases and what's being added. And if that feature that you're missing isn't there, there is that, request for enhancement sites. If you just search for RFE, request for enhancements, there's a long list of things that people would like to see in Cognos that either are there or aren't there, and you can vote on them, upvote them, and they kind of float to the top the more people, are interested in them. So if you have a really good idea or, something's missing that maybe people weren't aware of, it can get, some traction pretty quickly. And they do look at that list and it gets, added. So I've seen, one, since we've been, doing this since the first version came out, things that were added to that list have been added and upvoted, and they have made it into current releases. So it's not like a moonshot. I mean, if it's a good idea and it's something that should be in there, they will address it. So I'd look at that and then kind of just, keep up to date with the different releases and figure out, maybe get like a preemptive plan as to, how long it's going to take you to upgrade to Cognos 11 and make sure that that coincides with the 10 end of support date.
Okay. Yeah, there have been some follow-up questions related to that about schedules, but because we only have like a couple more minutes, it's appropriate to mention that if we don't get to your question here in the Q&A, we're going to get to most of them, but if we don't get to yours, we will send out a written Q&A response doc for it. So just be patient, and we will get every question answered. Okay, this is actually an interesting one. If we point the database to a new installation, and I'm assuming the content story, point the database to a new installation, how can we take care of not letting schedules trigger from non-prod instances?
If we point the database,
I think you're saying that when you make a backup of the content store from prod, and then you restore it into a non-prod instance, how do you make it so that those schedules don't get triggered on a non-prod instance? I think
there's a couple of things. I mean, one, you could just not enter any of the mail server information. So if you don't provide like an SMTP server, Cognos has no way to deliver anything. Mm-hmm. There's also specific services, in the configuration. Each Cognos config has a list depending on, the components you installed, but there's one for, a job service, a delivery service, a batch service. Those three kind of work together to kind of deliver emails and run schedules. So if those are all disabled, those things can't run as well. So there's ways to kind of disable all that stuff before you bring services online. In some case, it came online and you had a schedule ready to run that instant, it wouldn't be able to send it out, so you wouldn't get duplicates. That's something we definitely do a lot with our upgrades and migrations.
Okay.
Hopefully that's what you were referring to, I think.
Yeah, that was from Prabal. So if you, Prabal, if we didn't get that answered, let us know. Okay, so this has been a great session. We promised everybody that we would be done in an hour. Thankfully, we have a lot of interest and a lot of questions. And like I said, we will get your question answered out, and we'll actually share the answers with the wide group as well. All right. Huge thanks, Todd, and the audience is letting us know the same thing. Thank you. This was great. So folks, give us feedback through the questions pane, and then look in your email for the alert about the recording being available and also the FAQ. All right. With that, I will end. What we'll do is we'll end the audio portion of the broadcast. We'll leave the GoToWebinar active for a few more minutes so that people's questions can get captured, and we'll catch you hopefully on August 3rd. when we do our enterprise BI versus these new self-service tools. Thanks again, Todd. Great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.